Another week of reveals went by, which means we got a couple of new cards for set 4 to talk about. But sadly, this week's reveals were kind of underwhelming, as most of them are just generic support cards or a couple of resource cards, and not anything special out of left field that could change or shake things up a little bit. But even though that might be the case, it's still important to talk about these cards because some of them are relatively nice generic support cards that might come into play in a future update when set 4 comes around, and it's best to be prepared for everything that's possible. Let's jump into it. Stand up, Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today it's the weekly roundup where we take a look at all the cards that were revealed last week or this week and analyze them and see if there's anything special being released this week. And with it said, let's jump straight into these cards, and we're gonna start off with the cards for Dragon Empire, as Dragon Empire got 2 new grade 3s, from which one is a double R grade 3 for the new Basaraga's archetype, as we've got Sealed Blaze Dragon Adalra, and Adalra has the effect, although when the unit's placed on the rearguard circle, if one arms is on your Vanguard circle, cost counter +1, choose an arms card from your hand or drop and arm it to one of your Vanguards. So this is yet another ability that allows us to immediately go from 0 arms to 2 arms in one turn, which allows us to empower and turn on our Basaraga turn immediately on the very first grade 3 right turn. This is great because this, together I believe with the spear, allows you to relatively consistently get a full power turn free game plan, and that's very nice. Now if I read the skill correctly, this card should circumvent the cost of other arms effects because it immediately equips it to your Vanguard when you pay the cost, thus you don't have to pay the cost of the arm card itself, which can be nice to somewhat circumvent certain resources, as yes it costs a counter blast, but some other arms cards force you to Soul Blast, and if you don't want to Soul Blast, you can use this ability to somewhat circumvent that, but it all comes down to the details in that particular aspect. But this ability mainly also interact nicely with the 2 arms cards that retire themselves after you use it. I believe that's the gun and it's the sword that allows you to use them and they get retired. Then with this card you immediately can re-equip them to your Vanguard, thus allowing them to keep you using them from the drop zone, thus making this card also incidentally being a plus. But at the same time you can also combine this with like cycle cards, where you discard your arms card to the drop zone and then use this card to use them from the drop onto your Vanguard, thus making those cycle cards or those discard costs actually not really minuses, which can be a nice little plus engine that you could have with this particular card. But on top of that, this card has also another effect, which is a continuous rearguard circle. During your turn, if 2 arms are on your Vanguard circle, this unit gets power +5k. So this synergizes with its own effect, thus as well as the effect from, I believe, the lands, making it a solid 18k beater, and that allows the whole deck itself to be a bit more aggressive with higher numbers, which is nice. It's not something amazing, but hey, it's an extra 5k plus. So I think this could be a very good solid pick for the new Basaraga arms deck, and I can definitely see it being played in the build. Now moving on to another grade 3, we've got Blaze Kickmon Koke, and Koke can be a nice addition for a specific overdress build, and you understand that once we take a look at the skill, which is auto. When this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, cost counter +1, choose a grade 0 card from your drop, call to the rearguard circle in the same column as this unit, and this unit gets boost until the end of turn. So this effectively is a Trickstar revival skill, because yes, you can use it with any trigger and it can make an 18k column because you can use it as a booster, and the 5k will then make a solid number. But the reason why I say specifically Trickster is because you want to have Trickster as an attacker to then combine with Erger to have a multi-attack engine. And this is another way to get it consistently off, because yes, you need to pay a counterblast, but Erger will refund that counterblast, which is honestly not that bad. And yes, you have Nirvana's own effect, which allows you to revive the Trickster anyways, but maybe you don't want to pay a discard and you have the extra counterblast, and you can then go for this option, and having a 13k beater, or in this case a booster, isn't actually bad because it makes an 80k column. And if you remember correctly, there is a card from set 2 that's Blaze Maiden Aruna that basically accomplishes the same numbers because she gains an additional 5k if she boosts a grade 1, but that card doesn't revive the Trickster. So this is effectively as strong as a Runa as a booster, but this also has the utility that it allows you to revive the Trickster in the first place. And if we combine that with Nirvana, you could effectively revive 2 Tricksters in one turn, which means if you have 2 Ergers in your hand, you can use them both. So there's definitely some usefulness to this card, and I can definitely see it being played if you want to go a different route where you're gonna rely on the Erger multi-tech, which is definitely a possibility with the showing of the new Grade 4 Nirvana, as Erger doesn't work with that. So you might see a split where one focuses on the multi-tech and one goes more for the pure pressure that the new Nirvana and potentially the new Verena will entice. Now, moving on from Dragon Empire, we've got some more Keter Sanctuary support cards, and we start off with a new triple Grade 3, which is heavily halberd of Solicitation, Voke. And Voke has the effect, act on Vanguard circle, cost Subless 1 and rest this unit. Look at 3 cards from the top of your deck. Choose up to 1 Grade 3 or greater unit with a different card name from this unit from among them, call to the Vanguard circle, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So this is effectively a plus engine, and I want to immediately say for Bastion, because I don't really see this being played in any other build, because you need to focus heavily on Grade 3s, and you're already running a bit too much Grade 3s in the other decks, and this doesn't feel like a good extra inclusion to make those decks more powerful or consistent. So yeah, it's for Bastion, and even Bastion, I'm kind of scratching my head if this is actually all that great, because we already have a double or Grade 3 from last set, from set 3, that somewhat accomplished the same thing. Yes, she only calls from the top, but she doesn't have to rest herself, so she's more immediate pressure, whereas this card isn't, but this card can generate more value over the course of a game. So it's basically pick and choose what you like more. This is just another option for Bastion. And then going on with the Keter Sanctuary support card, we also have a Grade 2 in the likes of Injection Angel, which is effectively an Angel Feather card that is just not right there yet, because its effect is auto. When this unit is placed in a Vanguard circle, if your damage zone has a face-up card, cost, put a trigger unit from your hand into the damage zone face down, choose a face-up card from your damage zone and put it into your hand. So effectively, you are allowed to swap a card from your hand with the card from the damage zone, but you need to specifically put a trigger into the damage zone, and you are forced to waste a counterblast because you need to pick up a card face up and you need to put a card face down, which isn't that ideal, because the Angel Feather cards or the Angel Feather effects are so strong, because not only do they allow you to put any card from your hand into the damage zone and swap any card back, so you have full utility, but while you do that, you typically also generate counter charge, because you can just grab a card that's face down and put a card that's face up into the damage zone. This card is none of that. It's very restrictive, and I am not a fan of this. Like, maybe it has some uses in Overdress with certain archetypes or certain decks, maybe a specific combo, but I think that's about it. I don't really see this getting all too much use in Premium. Maybe the non-Angel Feather clans can really use this, but even then, this feels very minimalistic in the value you can generate of it. But I can definitely miss certain things, so if there's something here, then definitely let me know in the comments down below, because I'm very curious if this card has any applications that's very useful for it. Now, moving on to the next nation, we've got Dark States. And for Dark States, we got a couple of cards, and we start off with some Bruce support, as we have this Grade 1 Diabolus Girls Stephanie, and Stephanie has the effect continues a Vanguard circle. If you are in Final Rush, all of your other units in the same column as the unit get power plus 5k. This is kind of underwhelming. It's basically the same as Steve, but instead of getting the power to Steve, it needs to give the power to the other unit. So this, if it's attacker, it gives the power to the booster, but you probably have this in the back row, so it makes the attacker stronger. Now, yes, you can recent the front row, so you get double value of the 5k. That's nice. You can also combine this a little bit with Leonard, where you can call new unit in the front row, which then also gets a little bit power. So there is some interaction, but it feels very minimalistic, where you want to use your Grade 1 spot for more utility cards or potential combo units than just a unit that gives passive 5k to a particular circle. So yeah, this is probably not that great, but there could definitely be some application if you want to go for a specific combo route where that 5k power that is going to be used multiple times is very important. So who knows, maybe this card actually will see some play. Now, moving on to another Grade 1 for Dark States, we've got Sudden Turn Gear Eagle, which has the effect auto Vanguard circle. When the attack this unit boosted hits, cost retire this unit, choose a grade 1 card from your soul, and call to the rearguard circle. So this is effectively another multi-attacker, which doesn't cost anything. Yes, it costs unit, but it doesn't cost soul or counterblast, or you could say it costs soul because it calls a unit from the soul, but that's details what we're talking about. Overall, this is an interesting card. Sadly, it has two problems in the fact that it specifically needs to boost and then hit. It's not boost or attack, which makes it more specific. And on top of that, you can only call a grade 1 specifically, so your choices are very limited. And yes, you can call it to encircle with a unit, so unlike Leonard, you can just call it on top of a rested attacker and then attack again. But because it's a grade 1, it's very unlikely that the attacker will be strong unless you are in a specific scenario. Let's say you play Baron Magnus, you have the grade 1 that can get another 10k. You also have the new Tripwire grade 1 that once it plays you can soul charge 1, and every time you soul charge you get 5k, so it's also the 13k attacker. Or if you are in Bruce, for example, you can combine it with the grade 1 that we just talked about, Stephanie, and it gives passive 5k power to the grade 1 that is going to get called out. So there are options, but I still feel like this card isn't all too great because it has it has a lot of restrictions. But there could definitely be something here because it is a multi-attack extender and it allows you to basically keep going if your opponent cannot guard your attack. So maybe in premium with all the nasty guard restrictions being in place in certain Dark States clans, this could come up. Now, another card that we've got, yet another grade 1 for Bruce, is Diabolus Jetter Wait, which has the effect, act on the rearguard circle. If you have a Vanguard with Bruce in its card name, which means it will also work with the grade 4, cost, put this unit into your soul, and it gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. I don't really like this card because effectively it feels like a weaker version of the Gear Dober that we got, I believe, in set 2, which effectively does the same as they both go to the soul and they both give 10k power, but the difference is that I believe the Gear Dog needs to be in Final Rush, but that's the same as saying you need to have Bruce card, because I would be very surprised if the grade 4 Bruce doesn't have Final Rush, but he doesn't have to, because the moment you can ride you already attained Final Rush, but that's besides the point. If you use both cards, they both goes to soul and they give 10k power to unit. Only the Gear Dober can give it to any unit, which makes it give it more utility. But the difference is that this also is act ability, which means you cannot use it mid-combo, whereas the Dober you can, which makes it more useful with things like Leonard and such. So yeah, this feels like a weaker version of the card that already came out in set 2, but I could be wrong, because maybe this card actually works very nicely with the new grade 4 Bruce. It's too early to say, so we have to wait and see until we see the new Bruce. And then moving on to the final card that we've got for Dark States, we've got a brand new grade 3 normal order in the likes of Helheim Fervent Rage. And Fervent Rage has the effect, play this with cost, discard a card from your hand, countercharge 1, if you are in Final Rush, draw 2 cards, choose up to 2 cards from your hand, call them to the rearguard circle, and they get power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now, there is actually a lot to unpack in this particular order, because first off, the first part of the skill is generic. You can play it, discard a card, and countercharge any deck. So basically, for discard 2, you countercharge 1. Do you want to play it in any other deck? Probably not. It's pretty bad, unless you think specifically it's worth it for the countercharge, but right now I don't really think that's the case. So that's not what you're gonna play it for. But in Final Rush specifically, we get a couple of extra things, because first off, you draw 2 cards. If you draw those 2 cards, you effectively cycle 2 while countercharging. That's honestly actually really good, or at the very least pretty nice, because you don't lose value, but you're going to draw into your combo pieces, and while you're doing that, you get a countercharge to boot, which is honestly not that bad. And you might think to yourself, yo, hold on a moment, you need to call 2 cards, so you're going to -2 immediately, so you steal -2 in the end. Well, first off, you don't have to call those units. It specifically states choose up to 2 cards from hand. So if you draw into 2 triggers and you don't want to call any cards from hand, you don't have to, which means you immediately you can just use this as a cycle card, and that's it, which is great. A cycle effect and a counter just on top of each other. But you can call the units, and even if you call those units, it is still actually a good cycle that doesn't minus you, because if you are already planning to call 2 cards from your hand onto the field, but you activate this card beforehand, you still are going to call those 2 cards, but on top of that, they now also get additional power, which is a great added bonus. So depending on the scenario when you use this card, this is actually a pretty decent amount of value you're generating without any actual cost attached to it, which is great. The only problem that lies with this card is that it's yet another normal order. And the issues with normal orders, you can only use once a turn. And Bruce already has plethora of very strong normal orders. We have the Pandemonium Tactics that came out in set 3, but we also have the Hell Dive Burst thing from set 2 that gives you basically a Persona Ride power buff to the front row. All these orders are very strong, and I don't know if this can outcompete with those orders. So it's going to be very tricky, but overall the card isn't bad. Now, moving on to another relatively nice card, we've got some more Stoicheia support. And for Stoicheia, we got a brand new double R grade 2 in the likes of Transferring Soul Slice Dragon. And Soul Slice Dragon has the effect, on a Erger circle, at the end of your turn, and this is going to sound strange, if you played and did Alchemagic an order, or attacked a total of 5 or more times this turn, cost put this unit into your soul and countercharge 1. Now you might think to yourself, whoa, hold on, multi-attack in Zorga. Now, calm down a little bit. That's not what this card is telling us here. What it effectively means is that this card is built for Zorga, but also Magnolia and Flagberg, because all these archetypes can activate this skill. Zorga will activate it once it's in Alchemagics, and the other two will do it once they basically complete their entire multi-attack engine. Now, effectively, we just have a unit that gives us a soul and a counter charge for the loss of 1 unit. In Zorga's case, it's not that bad because you refund at least one of the resources you use to resurrect this card to the board. If you use Zorga's skill, it costs a counterblast, but it immediately refunds it. But it also generates soul on top of it. If you use it with something like Condensation or any of the other revival skills, you refund the soul, but then also get a counter charge on top of it. So this is a nice card to generate more resource while doing that. Or you can just call it from hand and it's a -1, but you get both resources, which will give you more cards on the board eventually, or more value. So it's not bad, and since Zorga can reuse it over and over again, you can just opt to run this as like a 1-off or maybe a 2-off if you want to see it more often, which isn't that bad. And for the other archetypes, I'm not sure if it's gonna be used at all, but it's a nice way to again give those decks more resources, and at the same time you have a way to clear your field so you're less susceptible for a retire. Now, in case of Flagberg, they already have a grade 1, which is, I believe, Price Trident, which is effectively the same skill, but then in a grade 1, and I think that card, and I say for Flagberg, but it also works for Magnolia, I think that particular card will somewhat outclash this card because it's specifically a grade 1, which means it can also boost in the scenarios where you need a booster, whereas this can only be attacker, and that's it. So we have to see which card is going to win out over the other, but it's a nice addition to have for Stoicheia nonetheless. Now, another card that we got for Stoicheia is this grade 3, Corrupting Usurper Dragon. And Usurper Dragon has the effect, auto from drop. If your grade 3 or greater Vanguard is placed, you may call this card to the Vanguard circle. Just like the, I believe, triple R grade 3 for Zorga, it's yet another 3+ that we generate to the board. Only this case, it's generic, which is nice. But I don't know if it's gonna be used all too much because you need to have this in a drop zone before you write your grade 3 or higher, which is very specific. Sure, in the late game it definitely can come up, especially if you're gonna Persona Ride, but it's just a 13k attacker, which doesn't really amount to a lot. Now, this could all change if we're gonna see some Superior Ride action going on. If we can Superior Ride during the battle phase, then I can definitely see this card being played, because this is effectively extra multi-attack on top of that. So now I don't see it being placed in Overdress, but maybe it will see some use in Premium with maybe some sneaky Grand Blue plays, because Grand Blue has access to this card, and Grand Blue also has access to the Stride ship that effectively allows you to rewrite during the battle phase, which then also can combine with this card. So if you use something like you rewrite into Nitros, the moment you rewrite into Nitros, you can resurrect this card. If you have 2, resurrect them both. They both can swing for 13k, or should I say 18k with Nitros. They both die off, and then you attack with Nitros, which effectively can resurrect 2 new Skull Dragons, which then will beat your opponent's face in as well. So this definitely could have some premium applications, but in Standard, probably not so much right now, but could see some future application if we see some Superior Ride shenanigans eventually coming down to Overdress, because I'm very confident that at some point we will get some Superior Ride things, as it's inevitable to happen at some point. It's bound to happen. And that also brings us to our final nation, which is Brandt Gate. And for Brandt Gate, we can see yet another resource card, as there's a lot of resource cards this week. We have this grade 1, which is Crushing Monster Mega Grego. And Mega Grego has the effect, auto Erger circle, when the attack this unit boosted hits, counter charge 1. It's very simple. I don't really have to explain this card. Is it great? Not really. Will it be used? Probably not. But it's also not outright terrible because it's just free counter charge, which is honestly not that bad. And with, let's say, for example, Orifice that can generate pretty big columns, it could be useful. And also, now that I think about it, with Prison making potentially big columns, this could be useful. And talking about Prison, we got a brand new grade 2, which looks a bit like a card from set 3, but it's a bit different because it's more, I think it's a bit cheaper, as we've got Aurora Battle Princess Restrained Peony. And Peony has the effect, although when it tunes placed on a record circle, soul charge 1 for each of your opponent's imprisoned cards in your prison. This skill is mandatory, and this skill can give you a lot of soul. And if you remember, the grade 4 Seraph Snow allows us to imprison a buttload of cards. So this card could be a gigantic soul engine in combination with that Seraph Snow, or should I say Seraph Pure White or Pure Light, I believe. But you might think, so what do you want to do with that soul? Well, there is a grade 3 from set 3, I believe, the Lemon, that uses free soul and a counterblast to, I believe, imprison a couple cards, but also gain power and a critical. That combined with the new passive power and critical boost from Seraph Pure Light, and you can stare down a multiple crit board with massive numbers, and if you hit the over trigger, that means any attack, and I mean literally any attack, can shoot your opponent from 0 to 6. So that could be a very nasty win condition or scenario you can set up that can definitely pressure your opponent for lethal very easily. So this card honestly might see some play, but it all comes down to how comfortable people feel with that play and if it's actually meta relevant, that combo. So we have to wait and see until we see the final list out of set 4 to know what this card is going to do. But that said, that's also the last card that we saw this week. Overall, not the most exciting reveals, mainly a lot of resource cards that gave us counter charge or counter blast, or maybe some multi-attack shenanigans, but very specific. Also a lot of unhit effects. But even though that's the case, there are a couple of potential hidden gems here and there that definitely can make the final cut once we see the actual list out of set 4. So overall, I'm very excited for this stuff, and I cannot wait to see the last couple of cards because set 4 is almost here, and there's only a couple of cards left to be revealed before we know the full power of all the new decks. So with that said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these cards. What are you most excited for, and what can you not wait to be revealed next, because there's only a couple of things left and the countdown has begun. With that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with it said, I've missed a time leap, and I see you guys in the next one!